8 to 9 o'clock Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Darren Grimes, standing in for the brilliant Neil Oliver on GB News TV and on radio. Now tonight I'll be telling you why I believe Suella Braverman, despite triggering panic amongst Britain's pearl-clutching chai latte-sipping elites, is actually resonating and speaking for the majority of the British public, despite the media narratives, of course, suggesting her appeal ends at the fringe right of the Conservative Party. It's no secret that the pandemic too resulted in economic catastrophe, but what the powers that be prefer to be left off the list is the catalyst of our financial woes that lockdown actually was, the decision to print money like it was going out of fashion. I'm joined by a top economist to assess the impact of those decisions and how we can actually remedy it today. The Conservative Party conference left us with plenty to talk about from this week, from our very own Nigel Farage boogieing down with Priti Patel to the Prime Minister wanting to take away our ciggies. But what's really going on within the Tories right now? Some claim the dissatisfaction amongst the party faithful is leading the real opposition to be within the governing party's membership, rather than the folk who sit across from them in the House of Commons. And there's been a tectonic boom in the self-care and well-being industry in recent years, with many flocking to learn how to love themselves and increase happiness. I'll be joined by a lady whose passion for health and well-being led her to start her own business, helping others achieve their self-care goals. All of that and more coming up, but first, an update on those news headlines with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. Good evening. Our top story tonight. Nearly 200 Palestinians and at least 100 Israelis have been killed, with hundreds more injured after the Hamas terrorist organisation launched a surprise attack on Israel. Now, those of you watching on television can see live footage of the Gaza skyline after thousands of rockets were fired and gunmen crossed the border in a deadly assault. Local news has reported that civilians in border towns were barricading themselves into their homes, pleading for help. Hamas says Israeli captives have been placed in secure places and in tunnels. Meanwhile, Israel's energy minister says there are plans to cut off the energy supply to Gaza. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says the UK will not tolerate terrorism.
The UK completely condemns these terrorist acts against Israel, and we support Israel's right to self-defense. And of course, we will be working closely with the Israeli government. We're already in contact with them and will continue to do so, both to protect British nationals in Israel and to try and bring peace as quickly as possible.
Dozens of Hamas terrorists have been stopped by Israeli naval personnel, according to Israel's defence forces. A warning for those watching on TV: you may find the following footage distressing. Earlier this morning, the IDF pursued dozens of terrorists along the southern maritime area as they tried to enter Israeli territory via the water. Soldiers opened fire on the militants, successfully destroying 4 vessels. Hamas terrorists were also stopped as they tried to cross into Israel along the southern border. Well, back here, Sir Keir Starmer has promised women that he'll tackle the toxic culture they face and, quote, drain the swamp of hate and inequality. Speaking at his party's women's conference in Liverpool, the Labour leader said he would take on the tech companies who push misogyny for profit. He also said there are still many battles ahead in the fight for equality and justice.
Labour will make a practical difference to the lives of millions of women in this country. But more than that step by step, reform by reform, mission by mission, we can also drain the swamp of hate and inequality through the efforts of reform, campaigning, and a Labour government on your side.
260 suspected rapists have been labelled as females by police over the last 4 years. That's according to data from the Crown Prosecution Service, which was obtained by the Daily Telegraph. The classification comes despite the Home Secretary urging police not to label rape suspects as women, as by law it can only be committed by a biological male. The figures show a further 209 suspects were recorded with sex unknown. SNP leader Humza Yousaf is being urged to rethink plans for independence after Labour's victory in the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election. Labour's Michael Shanks defeated the Scottish National Party by winning 58% of the vote. It's prompted calls for Yousaf to rethink his proposal that a positive showing at the next general election should be seen as a mandate for Scottish independence. Staying in Scotland, motorists have been evacuated from a flooded road by helicopter amid extreme rainfall and flooding in Scotland, with the Met Office issuing a warning of danger to life. An amber weather warning is in place for a large part of central Scotland, while a yellow weather warning covers most of the country. Travel disruption is also taking place, with ScotRail cancelling trains on a number of lines. In contrast, southern areas are experiencing dry weather, with temperatures as high as 25 degrees Celsius earlier. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now let's get back to Darren.
What a week it's been, eh? We had Yvette Open Arms, Closed Doors Cooper. Well, she's a woman that's never seen a migrant she doesn't like, just not in her own house, of course. She was criticising Suella Braverman this week for being a part-time Home Secretary with a pound shop Trump approach. The irony. But let's get one thing straight here. While the Chardonnay swilling elites are fumbling with their worry beads over Suella's America tour, her conference speech actually made her not just a breath of fresh air, but more like a hurricane in the stale corridors of Westminster. Far from the hysterical claim that she's a voice in the wilderness, actually Braverman is the megaphone, in my view, for the silent majority. And yes, Yvette, there are statistics. A Home Secretary's best friend when they're actually telling the truth, that is. Because I've got some stats here. A striking 60% of our islanders reckon we should put UK workers before migrant workers. A remarkable 63% say current immigration levels are more packed than a tube during a rail strike. An eye-opening 66% agree with Suella that uncontrolled immigration poses an existential challenge to the West. Someone cue the dramatic music on that one. 69%, nudge, nudge there, Charlie, believe that illegal migration is about as sustainable as a Jenga tower built by a toddler, and a paltry 14% think we should let EU judges have their mittens all over our borders. Now, all of these stats suggest to me, and they're your views, that doesn't look like an out-of-touch politician. To me, that looks like someone bang on the money. And let's not forget the 39% who think, like Suella, that multiculturalism has fizzled out like a wet firework. The other 30% probably haven't stepped foot in the likes of Tower Hamlets, where schools have fewer white kids, and actually this 46.8% of Tower Hamlets residents who were born outside of the UK. Now, why is that an issue? Well, look at the 2016 Dame Louise Casey report, which sounded alarm bells about social exclusion being louder than a carnival barker. Is it racist to say, hey, have we got a problem here? It's about as British, if you ask me, as moaning about the weather. So let's talk about the average pensioner, right? Fred and Ethel, say, who bought their quaint English home back in the 70s. They perhaps can't recognise their community anymore. It's like they woke up in a different dimension. The leaders making migration decisions are from another dimension as well, untouched by the ramifications. They're not the ones, you see, having to face the same issues as perhaps victims in Rotherham, for example, who were sacrificed at the altar of multiculturalism. So if Suella Braverman had the keys to number 10, I reckon she'd be like a political Bear Grylls, doing whatever it takes to ensure the UK isn't the world's doormat. If that means ditching international conventions or airlifting illegal arrivals to Ascension Island or elsewhere, then so be it. And she's got a willing electorate standing behind her, the stats show it, with a thumbs up and a cricket bat ready for action. So why does the left attack Braverman with the kind of vitriol usually reserved for a Piers Morgan tweet? Because she shatters their fragile identity politics. A brown woman who doesn't buy into their narrow, race-baiting ideology. The humanity. In a nutshell, folks, if you ask me, Suella Braverman is not an echo, she's the voice of reason, the voice of the majority, and dare I say it, the voice of Britain. All of that, of course, my opinion, and you are more than free to disagree. Keep your tweets and emails coming in throughout the show. You can email us at gbviews@gbnews.com. You can also tweet us at gbnews. I'll try to get some of your comments later on, much more important than my views. Joining me now, though, and throughout the show, is the former advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley. Charlie, thank you very much for your company.
Thank you.
Pleasure to see.
Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. And then after the break, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, actually admitted that the country has underestimated the economic impact of printing money during the pandemic. I'm sure Charlie has views on that later on too. Starting with Suella Braverman, I mean, you've seen some of the hysteria going on this week, right, after that speech she made, not just in America a couple of weeks ago, but then at party conference. But it went down pretty well at Tory party conference. Do you think this is just the views of the fringe, or do you actually look at the polling like this and think actually she's onto something?
Well, I think she's onto something, and you referenced a number of percentages there and a number of numbers. The only number that I'm interested in is making sure that delivering the reduction in migration, stopping the small boats, ensures that Rishi Sunak remains in number 10. That's the only way that he can stay there. And I think what it comes down to is, and what we sort of discovered at party conference, it's just about good old British fairness. You know, there was hysteria over the summer when the Australian cricket team effectively cheated during the Ashes test. People just like a good sense of British fairness. We're very tolerant as a nation. I think some of the things that Suella says to make her point as cut through as possible, she may go to the extreme when I think, and there's nothing wrong with sort of, you know, some of the things that she says, but I think, you know, people like to see you work a bit harder and see you push to the limits before you then deliver some of the things that she has said and the tone in which she's done it. But she's cut to the quick, she's getting on with it, and I think we just have to now wait and see what happens with the Rwanda judgment in November.
Indeed, but do you not think that there's something that the public are actually getting here, which is a frankness that they feel has been lost lost within British politics. You know, looking back to the politics of old, the Tony Benns of the world may have been a little bit more upfront and frankly personal than perhaps the Blairite PPE graduates of today. Do you think actually the public are saying, oh, actually, I like the cut of her jib?
No, I do. I think politics for many years, particularly during the Tony Blair years under Alastair Campbell, it became a very PR-orientated machine. It was about being very PC, very polite. You know, it wasn't actually addressing the real issues that people face, and you know, being able to just articulate it directly, I think, is something that the country wants. You saw that in America. You've seen that through Donald Trump. That's why he was able to cut through, because he just said it how it is. And I think, you know, we're seeing politicians like Suella Braverman, you're seeing Kemi Badenoch, you know, they're talking very directly to the electorate. They're talking very clearly about the issues that they face, identifying their priorities, knowing what to do or coming up with a solution, knowing how to articulate that. So it, you know, makes sense to the British people, and that's why it's becoming ever more popular.
And you were in Manchester for that Conservative Party conference. Are you hearing that actually people are on manoeuvres, Charlie, dare I say, that actually there's rumblings of what might happen in that election next year, and they're all thinking about getting the top job of the Conservative Party?
Well, there is no vacancy, and there won't be a vacancy, I hope, for, you know, my own...
Well, it wasn't a very good by-election result for the Conservatives, was it?
Well, I think that's one of the interesting things. There was such a low turnout. And look, the Tories in Scotland, we were the third-rate party there. We were, you know, the third horse in that race. You know, the horse with three legs probably in that race, because, you know, we're just not... You know, we were never going to win it. But the turnout was so low, I don't think you can take that one result in Scotland and, you know, replicate that across the country, and then, you know, you will have a Labour majority.
Could you replicate it in Scotland, do you think? Do you actually look at what happened there and think, well, the SNP's days are numbered, and actually that spells something positive for Sir Keir Starmer?
It does for Sir Keir, but then you've got to look at just south of the border, but the north of England, where you've got a huge number of red wall seats who voted for Brexit. And when they hear Sir Keir Starmer talking about realigning with the EU and not wanting to divert, you know, these are people that very, very, you know, strongly voted for Brexit because they didn't feel as though that Westminster was working for them and their communities. And if you're going to vote for Labour again because you want Sir Keir Starmer to realign yourself with the EU, well, that's not what the people in Sunderland, in Newcastle, you know, your part of the world, that's not what people voted for. So he's got a real balancing act, and we might see where he ends up later this week.
Do you think Rishi Sunak then missed an opportunity? That was the one thing that struck me, because he didn't actually really mention immigration. He didn't really mention things like the cost of living crisis or energy security. He focused instead on A-levels, on banning cigarettes for children, on a whole host of things, Charlie, where I think the kind of people that you're referencing in the likes of the North East, the North West, wherever it may be, are just looking to the Prime Minister for action. And actually, we don't want action on banning cigarettes. We want action on getting the cost of living down, on ensuring we've actually got border controls. Where was that?
Well, I thought it was a very thoughtful speech, because if you're talking about the education system, and the education system has chopped and changed, you know, when you and I were at school, you know, from GCSEs to A-levels to T-levels, now this, you know, English baccalaureate that will allow you to study 5 sort of A-levels, or the equivalent of, as opposed to 3, you know, bringing us up to speed with the rest of sort of the international community. I think those things were very well thought through. Banning cigarettes and things is about the long-term sort of protection for the NHS. You know, of course, people have the freedom to do things that they want. There should be the civil liberty in this country. But if the amount that is spent on the NHS is due to, you know, cancer diagnosis, all related to smoking, we're all living longer. We're all going to be old one day. We're going to be like Fred and Ethel that you mentioned at the very top. We're all going to be in contact with the NHS at some point. So we need to make sure that every penny that goes into the NHS you know, matters. And if you can reduce those harmful conditions like cancer that is due to you know, related to smoking, if you can reduce all of that at the top, and then you know, you're helping the wider society.
So then are we going to, for the rest of our days then, Charlie, live to protect the NHS? Because that was the mantra during the lockdowns, wasn't it? Is that going to be the mantra for the rest of our days? Can our viewers tonight look forward to being told to think about protecting the NHS for ad nauseum, basically?
Well, I think look, there are societal shifts in terms of people's behaviour. You know, so young people now tend to drink a lot less than what maybe you and I did when we were a kid. But kids are not smoking. Young people don't take up smoking as they did even 10 years ago.
Yeah, so why is it necessary? Why does Rishi Sunak need to focus on this?
Well, to make sure that I think that those that think about it, think twice maybe, just to look after their own health and looking after the health of the NHS, which is going to look after all of us in years to come.
I'm not convinced that it was absolutely necessary for the main keynote conference speech. But Charlie, we'll come back to you very, very shortly, because after the break, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, well, he admitted this week that they underestimated the economic impact of printing money during the pandemic. I'm going to be joined by a top economist to explain what's going on there. Plus, is the Conservative Party's real opposition actually coming from within its own ranks? The former Tory MP Neil Parish is going to join me to unpick all of that. I'll be back with you in just a moment. Stay with us.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Cheers very much for your company. Time for some of your views. As I say, much more important than my own. Sean has written in, and Sean says, I agree with Darren. Braverman is basically the only hope for the survival of our way of life. Maybe that's a conversation going on within the Conservative Party. Norma says, though, Norma disagrees with Sean. Norma says Suella Braverman is useless. If she was capable of stopping the boat, she'd have done it by now. No confidence in her at all, and her party conference speech proved Why? Well, there we are. Now, I'm standing in, of course, for Neil Oliver, but I want to talk to you about this story that I think Neil Oliver would have liked, actually, which is the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt. He told a fringe event at the Conservative Party conference this week that there'll be no more tax cuts until inflation is under control. Because, guess why? Well, the lockdowns that we had, right? The war in Ukraine, as well as a wage price spiral as factors that actually eat into our economic woes. But The Spectator magazine's Kate Andrews this week, she wrote that many of the powers that be have actually evaded imparting the blame on the decision to print money in excess in the early days of the lockdowns as a catalyst for inflation and other economic problems. So was this tactic of printing money a key reason that we're now in such dire economic straits? Or is this impact being overstated by lockdown skeptics? Well, I'm joined now by top economist and fellow at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Julian Jessup. Julian, thank you very much for your time. In Britain, of course, the Bank of England printed more in the first year of the pandemic than it did actually in the 10 years leading up to it. That's a statistic that we don't hear at all, is it not?
Yeah, this is all very frustrating. I mean, at least we've got a little bit of progress here. So the Chancellor has recognised that inflation is something to do with monetary policy and how much money there is in the economy. But he's still not got there yet in two ways. First of all, he's saying that it's only one of several factors. He actually suggested that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is more important, which is confusing. The individual prices happen to be going up the most with what's driving the overall level of inflation. But also, he talks about collective we having got this wrong. But actually, there are plenty of people, plenty of monetarist economists, even people like Liz Truss, who are warning that printing too much money was going to cause inflation. So this sort of idea that this was a mistake that everybody made is actually pretty galling for those of us who are warning about it.
So do you think then, Julian, Liz Truss is sat at home watching this with perhaps a glass of vino or whatever else, and she's saying, cheers, I got it right, and actually she's been proven right on this? Is that the case?
Well, I think she has, but of course it's not actually helped her very much because she'd been warning for some time that interest rates were artificially low and have to go back to more normal levels at some point. And of course it's that return of interest rates to more normal levels that contributed to the downfall of her premiership. So he was blamed for something that would have happened anyway, and indeed is happening in other major countries in the world, like the US. So I think it's only not much consolation for her, and it's not much consolation for the rest of us who've been warning that printing all this money and keeping interest rates too low was a recipe for inflation.
And Julian, what lessons are there to learn from other countries that perhaps didn't go as hell for leather with lockdown as we did? Are the likes of Sweden perhaps not as impacted as we are here at home? Inflation is still stubbornly high. This is something that you cover quite often on your blog and in your Twitter feed. Is this a problem that's less significant in other countries that didn't say, well, we need to lock down, we need to do it sooner, we need to do it harder and for longer?
Well, actually, I don't think COVID or Russia or any of these factors adequately explain why inflation rates have been different in different countries. It all basically comes down to monetary policy. So, Sweden's underlying inflation rate is pretty much the same as the underlying inflation rate in the UK. Again, I think there's a danger here of missing the wood for the trees. You don't explain inflation by looking at whichever prices happen to be going up the most. And that's a mistake that a lot of people still make. Because if those prices hadn't gone up, then maybe others would instead. When you've got a situation when there's too much money chasing too few goods and services, there's going to be a big pickup in overall inflation. Simply looking at which particular price is going up the most, whether that's food or energy or wages, is missing that bigger picture. I'm afraid that most commentators, certainly most central banks, are still doing that. So there is a bit of navel gazing going on at the Bank of England at the moment. They've commissioned an outside expert, the former governor of the US central bank, to have a look at things. But it's not clear to me he's going to address the fundamental questions about the link between money and credit on the one side and what's happening to the overall price level on the other.
OK, Julian, stay there one moment. I'm just going to turn now to Charlie Rowley, who's in the studio. Now, Charlie, of course, a big accolade of Michael Gove. Now, the Govester wasn't so kind on Liz Truss, on poor old Lizzie. Now, do you think, actually, Julian's got a point, that Liz was right on all of this money printing and all the rest of it? Or do you say she wanted to bring about unfunded tax cuts?
Well, as you know, Darren, Liz is a big fan of mine, and I'm a fan of Liz now, as a person, as we dance the night away at Conservative Party conference together. Look, I think when we talk about Liz Truss, some of the things that she said were absolutely right. But, you can't get away from the fact that the communication was suboptimal, to say the least. It didn't have the confidence that the markets required in order to enact the policies that she was trying to drive through. Even her own chancellor at the time, Kwasi Kwarteng, has said, he tried to get her to sort of slow down a bit, just to, bring people with you and you steady the ship, and then, you can make the tax cuts that you need. You can do the economic policies that you're putting forward. So I think there's no getting away from that. But I think, look, in terms of money itself, there have been two huge interventions in terms of the state funding through COVID, 400 billion, coupled with energy bills. So it was the second intervention that I think people tend to forget about when we talk about the state intervening and the Treasury sort of stumping up the cash for people to protect people's energy bills. But also, with inflation in general, you're bringing in food, it's through imports, and of course, you're funding, lorries, you're funding the transport network, all of which is relying on fuel, which comes from Russia, and that's who are currently in conflict with Ukraine. So of course prices are going up in that sense. Now, did we print too money? Has there been an impact on the UK economy more so much greater than any other European country? I don't think so. I think we are growing. We've grown faster than France and Germany, only by a little bit. But we're on the right track to get that economic sort of picture looking great again.
Right, Julian, I'm going to bring you back in then on what you've just heard there, because actually I didn't mention energy, and that is one massive package of support that taxpayers were offered. Now, you've written about this one as well. Is that more to blame than lockdown?
Well, that explains what's been happening to energy prices. Lockdown explained what was happening to the prices of certain goods and services, but that's just where the inflation shows up. It doesn't explain the overall level of inflation. That's simply because there was too much money printed and interest rates were too low. And I think the danger of focusing on those individual prices is that you assume that as those prices fall back, then inflation will neatly fall back as well. But that's not what's happened. So the energy prices are coming down, but the prices of other goods and services have started to pick up again. So I think it's really important to get away with this idea that you can explain inflation by looking at individual prices. The bigger picture is that there's too much free money floating around and happened to have found its way into energy prices and the prices of certain other goods and services, but it hadn't been then, it would have been somewhere else.
I mean, just briefly then, Julian, I mean, what do you think the economic consequences of another lockdown that's been proposed by certain quarters, more radical quarters, it has to be said, that actually we need climate lockdowns next?
Well, this is a sort of separate topic from the issue of inflation, but it is very worrying that some people reach for bans and lockdowns in every circumstance. I noticed you were talking earlier about the smoking ban, which I think actually as a piece of economics is pretty poor. If you're worried about the additional burden on the NHS, then you should deal with that through punitive taxes on tobacco, which we already have. But also you need to think about the longer-term fiscal implications of people living longer and actually putting more pressures on the NHS and on the pension system. So I think the smoking ban, like most bans, would fail at a simple economic cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah, well, Julian Jessup, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for your expert opinion and your time. And, of course, that was Charlie Rowley there. Now, up next, are the disaffected Tory faithful taking Keir Starmer's job as the real opposition? Stay with me to find out. Plus, the self-care industry is booming. We all need to love ourselves, they say. I'll be joined by a well-being coach and a businesswoman to find out why. That's all in just a moment.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm Darren Grimes, in for the wonderful Neil Oliver on GB News TV and on radio. It's time for some of your views. Keith has written in and Keith says, Darren, I'm sick of hearing about the NHS. Bring on privatisation. Get rid of the deadwood. The cost of smoking to the NHS is less than the tax contribution. Anyway, what's the price of freedom of choice? Well, and Danny's written in to say, oh, poor Charlie. Charlie Rowley is on another planet. Oh, not all cancers are smoking related. There's overwhelming evidence that governments, previous advisors and what we eat is more harmful to us than smoking. Oh, well, there's a view. Now, this week's Conservative Party conference saw, of course, some interesting policy decisions from the Prime Minister, from scrapping the HS2 to effectively bringing in that smoking ban that we've just mentioned there, to the Chancellor vowing not to cut taxes, despite being a supposedly Conservative administration. Some are arguing about that. The announcements followed recent years of supposed economic mismanagement and internal turmoil. They've received mixed reviews from the party faithful, of course. You only have to look at the contrast in responses to his speech on X, formerly known as Twitter, from members versus MPs, that's members of the party, to MPs, to actually see the divisions in real time. And on Tuesday, The Telegraph's Alison Pearson wrote that many within the Tory party, from members and activists to former cabinet ministers, have become disaffected to the point of openly slamming the government, akin to opposition rhetoric. Now, the responses from Tories to recent government policy has led to that charge there. They're saying that actually it's not the Labour Party, it's not Sir Keir Starmer, it's the Conservative Party's own ranks who are the real opposition. So do these divisions leave Rishi Sunak with any chance of winning the next election? Well, I'm joined by a man that knows a thing or two about standing in elections, the former farmer and Conservative MP, Neil Parish. Neil, you must be happier than a pig in muck, dare I say, not to be in that Parliament right now.
Well, it certainly is an interesting parliament, isn't it? And I think, I'm old enough to remember 97, and I remember between sort of 92 and 97, every member of parliament, all the party had different ideas to the Prime Minister, John Major in those days, and everybody went out in the tide when the election came in 97. So I think, if the party doesn't sort of get behind Rishi Sunak and have one view on life, whether they like it or not, then I think the election will be worse than ever. I mean, I think if they were to rally now, I think they're still going to struggle to win the next election, but it wouldn't be a total disaster. Whereas I think if they carry on having different ideas, why will people vote for a party, which comes up with different ideas every day? Now, I think actually Rishi Sunak, you can love or hate him, but I think people actually like Rishi Sunak, and they probably like Rishi Sunak a little bit more than they like the Conservative Party at the moment. So I think it would be very wise for everybody to knuckle down and get on with it, but they show no sign of it, do they, at the moment?
Yeah, well, indeed. OK, I want to bring in Benjamin Butterworth, who joins me in the studio now, and then I'll get to Charlie Rowley in a mo. But Benjamin, I mean, do you agree with what Neil Parish was saying there, that, actually the Tories just need to get their act together, essentially? I'm assuming that you do.
Well, they've needed to get their act together for a long time. I mean, you look at particularly the last 2 or 3 years of the Tory party, and they make the Windsors look united. I mean, the family rows that they're having. You had the big announcement at conference was scrapping HS2, and then all but Liz Truss or the previous Tory Prime Ministers come out and say that's a bad decision. You have the Home Secretary giving a speech in which she goes on about wokery and trans people, tedious once more. And then one of its longest-serving politicians, Andrew Boff, in the London Assembly, comes out attacking her. I think that, I think the idea that disunited parties lose elections isn't always true, because Boris Johnson sort of had lots of problems there and he still managed to win. But now they just look like a farce, because they're arguing over everything.
The decks, right? He got rid of the opposition very forcefully. He suspended the whip for those.
He did, but the opposition was clearly there. But look, the party just looks like a mess right now. You've got Suella Braverman saying they need to stop the boats. So then Rishi Sunak, he couldn't stop the boats, but he did manage to stop the trains.
Oh, well, Charlie, before we go back to Neil, I just want to ask you about one thing closer to home, actually, closer to GB News, which was that actually, I think the star of Conservative Party conference was our very own Nigel Farage. Does that not suggest that actually the Conservative Party is longing for something other than what it's currently got?
Well, I would disagree with that, I'm afraid. I thought you were the star of Conservative Party conference, Darren. You were there, and in full. But look, I mean, I don't think. I think Boris was an anomaly in a sense of having a divided party. It was a divided country over Brexit, so trying to manage that. But him as a big personality, outgoing sort of Tigger kind of figure, I think he was able to overcome these things. I think Labour just haven't had the scrutiny. I mean, this week will be vital, I think, for the Labour Party. They haven't had the scrutiny, they haven't had policy announcements. The public still don't know who they are and what Sir Keir Starmer stands for. That's why. No, that's why. Hold on. That's why.
Saying Keir Starmer flip-flops.
Well, he does. Well, he does.
You've literally got a Tory party that couldn't make its mind up over who should be Prime Minister 3 times in 3 months. Rishi Sunak says that he supports High Speed 2. The Transport Secretary says, and the Chancellor says it's essential. Then weeks later, they cancel it.
Rishi Sunak is, and you're absolutely right, but to identify some of the minor rows that have taken place over the last minor rows that have taken place over the last couple of years within the Tory party. But Rishi Sunak is the candidate for change. He's going to change the way this country goes forward. When you're talking about education policy, with
Charlie.
Education policy like the T-levels, making the big decisions like HS2.
The T-levels?
That's
telling me the time there.
What is the new English baccalaureate now, which is coming
the new A-levels.
And so, look, there are many things that the government is doing.
You've been a special advisor. Do you not look at this and think, what a nightmare that they can't make their mind up from 1 month to the next?
But look, unless you're Nadine Dorries, who just has a visceral hate for Rishi Sunak, the party is behind Rishi Sunak. The party is behind the Prime Minister.
Former Member of Parliament, then. Let's go back to Neil. Neil, I mean, Sir Keir Starmer, Benjamin sits there and says, you know, well, the Conservative Party doesn't know what it's about. It doesn't know its bottom from its elbow. But actually, Sir Keir Starmer's taken more policy positions than the Kama Sutra.
Yeah, I mean, I think the trouble with the opposition is that, you know, Keir Starmer doesn't really know what he wants, and he's very cautious. And I think really now, whoever wants to win the election have got to get out there and really catch something on fire. At the moment, I think the British public are pretty bored, to be blunt with you, with both parties, because they don't see a lot of difference in them. And I think, you see, when Rishi Sunak started to talk about delaying the ban on petrol cars, if you live in a rural area, if you run businesses in a rural area, you actually were quite pleased with that, because you can't afford to change all your vehicles so quickly. So I think there's a lot to play for. If the Conservative Party looks like a Conservative Party and doesn't look like a sort of status party that sort of poured so much money into the economy and actually borrowed so much money because of the pandemic, it's all got so muddy for everybody. And I think, you know, if only the party would turn around and be a little bit more conservative, certainly a bit more united, and certainly have a reason for somebody to vote for it. Because like I said, at the moment, you know, we can't organise something in a brewery, can we? That's the problem. And that is the problem. And I think if we pull together, we have still got a chance, but divided we won't.
OK, we'll leave it there. Neil Parish, the former Tory MP, thank you very much for your time there. And, of course, in the studio by Benjamin Butterworth and Charlie Rowley there with me now. And, well, after the break, we're going to be talking about self-care and well-being. The industry, apparently, is soaring. And it seems we all want to show ourselves more love. But what's behind the boom? Self-care expert, the coach and businesswoman Naomi Buff joins me in the studio to tell us all about that in just a mo.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Cheers very much for your company. I'm Darren Grimes, standing in for the wonderful Neil Oliver on GB News TV and on radio. Now, it's time for some of your views. Annie has written in, and Annie says, the Conservative Party members like me were right to choose Liz over Rishi. The problem for Liz was the globalists wanted Rishi and the membership to choose the wrong person, so no matter what she had done, she would have been pushed out. Well, Neil says Milton Friedman's book, Free to Choose, he's an economist, Milton Friedman, explained very specifically and clearly what the source of inflation was, the printing of money. He said that leads directly to inflation. Therefore, to stop inflation in its tracks, you simply have to stop printing money. Why was this lesson not sunk in with the powers that be in 2023? Thank you for your views, much more important than my own. Now, folks, moving on, we all love to love ourselves. It's the creed of the day, is it not? And in recent years, the self-care and well-being industry, it's a booming industry. So our next guest today discovered the joys of healthy living and self-care in 2011, leading her to develop a passion for such practices and to actually start her own business, coaching others on it. I'm joined now by the integrative and holistic well-being expert and the founder of Nourish by Naomi, Naomi Buff. Naomi, you know, your surname, Buff, that does strike me as someone perfect for a well-being coach, does it not?
Thank you very much.
Charlie Rowley is already getting your business card out, ready for this well-being.
I've never been called Buff.
So tell us what actually is it, because for a lot of people watching at home, they'll be thinking, oh, this all, love yourself more and all the rest of it. It doesn't sound very British. Sell it to the British people. Sell it to us.
I would love to sell it to you, literally. So we live in a very stressed out world, right? And the current things that we're using to help us through the stress just aren't working. They aren't sustainable, they aren't healthy, they're not giving us that fulfillment and that love for life. So the way that I work is really by doing the inner work, not looking for the outside things to find happiness in. I know people who have got bucket loads of cash, they've got businesses, they've got the cars, yachts, everything. They're not happy. So you have to ask why, and then really look at the inner world, and that comes from self-love.
So can this gong get me off alcohol then? Can it ensure that I don't turn to the bottle after a stressful day? Is that what you're telling me?
Well, it could, and if not, I could throw this over as well.
Well, please demonstrate the power of well-being through you've bought a collection of goods. Show us how this has worked, how this is used in your practice, in your job.
Absolutely. Well, this is a gong, and this one's called Sedna, and the magic of sound vibration. It's been around for thousands of years, so it's not a fad. It's not something new. It's something ancient that's been used to heal. And the magic of the gong is that the sound vibrations they wash over you and they wash through you to bring you into a deeper state of relaxation. So what they're doing is they're resetting and recalibrating the nervous system. We live in a world where we're constantly in fight or flight. We're highly cortisol, adrenaline. We don't have that time where we can rest and digest.
So this is a form of meditation, is it? Is it a bit like this ASMR thing that I've read about?
It's another tool.
Another tool.
Yeah, there's lots of different tools, and the thing that I really promote is about finding what works for you. We're all really different. We have an individual blueprint of what works for each of us. For me, when I was going through a really traumatic divorce, I had crippling anxiety, and anybody who's had anxiety will know that feeling in the chest, in the stomach, where it's just debilitating. You can't do anything. And I would come to my gongs and I would play the gongs, and this was right at the beginning before my business really took off with the sound therapy. And I'd play the sound, and the physical feelings of the anxiety, that crippling feeling that meant that I couldn't even move, would completely dissipate. And I was like, wow, like I can breathe again. And I just found that really fascinating and really magic, how it was so quick. So I think it's really about, for an individual person, just to find what works for you.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie, do you think you'd like to bong a gong for a moment of meditation?
Well, after that bust-up I've just had with Butterworth, I might need to... And how long would you use it for? What is the time that you use it? 30 seconds? Is it a couple of minutes? What is it that actually sort of, before the overall impact? And how often? Once a day? Once a week? What's the...
You can gong as much as you like.
Thank you.
It's not just the gong, though, right? There are other things here. There are other forms of therapy that you would recommend that have been useful to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I have like crystal bowls, chimes, wah-wah stick.
A wah-wah stick?
Would you like to see the wah-wah?
Yes, I would.
A sound bath.
Oh, yes, I see.
Yeah.
Ah.
So what a sound bath is, it's it's using all of the different instruments that you see, and the process is 40 minutes for a full sound bath, but you can get really good benefits in like 10, 15 minutes, but 40 minutes is what I would do like a group session as, and in that it would be some gongs, it would be some of the bowls, it would bring you up, it would come crashing down, and it really helps, like, as I said, like resetting the nervous system. It helps with sleep.
Do you get a lot of people saying, at first, being a little bit apprehensive, a little bit sceptical, perhaps?
They're my favourite people.
Ah.
I love it. I love it because they're the ones that come over at the end, they're going, oh, that was the best thing ever, when can I come back?
Because are they the people that are the most reluctant in your experience? Are they the ones that actually need it the most, who are living stressful lives, who are perhaps a little bit anxious at certain points of the day, who can really benefit from just taking some time out?
Absolutely. I think everybody can benefit from it. I mean, every now and again I do get somebody who comes along and they're like, that wasn't really for me. I'm like, fine.
Right.
And I can give them suggestions of other things that will work for them. But mostly people will come back because they'll sleep like a baby afterwards. And the effects of a sound bath, it isn't a one-hit wonder. It does have lasting effects as well. So it doesn't, and whilst like it can't change like the stress that goes on outside, that would be amazing if it could, wouldn't it? What it does is it really helps with like our ability to cope with those stresses. So perhaps you're less reactive, you're less angry, like you're less tense.
Well, they're good things. They're good things. I could do with that, Charlie.
Well, yes, yeah, and there's a serious point because we're hearing ever more people are being prescribed antidepressants on the NHS. That is the go-to that GPs are now just signing it off because there seems to be nothing else. If there are alternatives,
like sweets,
exactly, they're giving them out. Like if there is alternatives out there or actual methods that can do good without popping pills, then I think that's a great thing.
Very briefly, if people want to find out more, where can they find out about you and your work?
They can find me on Instagram, Nourish by Naomi.
Nourished by Naomi above there. Thank you very much for your time. Charlie Rowley as well, thank you very much for your time. He's off to play with your gong now, mate. Well, folks, it's 7 o'clock. This is Darren Grimes in for Neil Oliver on your telly, online and DAB Plus radio even. Coming up, it's the Saturday 5. I'm not going anywhere. Join us there.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we'll bring you the latest on the tragic scenes playing out in Israel, with voices in the field and top analysis closer to home. In my big opinion, as the police give in to gender madness, let's be clear, there is no such thing as a female rapist. And in my take at 10, Irish Premier Leo Varadkar says Britain is disengaging from the world. Rubbish. He's disengaged from reality. We're live from 9.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry, who your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Today's weather was a contrast from north to south, and that will be continuing into Sunday as well. High pressure is situated closer towards southern areas of the UK, allowing things to be relatively settled and also importing some rather warm air. But it's this trailing frontal system across areas of Scotland that is continuing to bring outbreaks of heavy and persistent rain. An amber warning is still in force until the early hours of Sunday morning. Do continue to take care if you are travelling here, as there will be further disruption at times. Elsewhere, it will be a relatively mild night underneath all the clouds. Temperatures generally around 12 to 14 degrees Celsius, might drop into single figures in some valleys and sheltered areas. The rain across Scotland will spread from the Outer Hebrides, then into parts of the Highlands, Aberdeenshire, Moray, over towards the Northern Isles a little later on in the day. It will be quite cloudy to start off Sunday across eastern areas of England, but a few brighter spells developing later on. And once the mist clears across southern areas of England and Wales as well, we will see some sunshine, and temperatures in that sunshine will climb towards 24 degrees Celsius, notably above where we should be for the time of year. Looking forward to Monday then, and it will be a relatively cloudy picture, particularly across western areas where we'll see some cloud pushing in across coastal areas, might make its way further inland as well, providing some drizzly outbreaks at times. Best of the sunshine further towards the south and east, where again it will be quite warm for the time of year. Temperatures there will be on the way down as we head throughout the next week, with a rain band moving in as well. Bye-bye.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on